All right, welcome everyone to the Agile Project Management Workshop today. Great to have you all. I'm excited to run this again and digging into this. Why the workshop? Well, I think a lot of managers, coordinators, everybody, engineers as well, can feel a lot like the people in this picture. A lot of chaos. We got a lot of tools and dashboards, reports, inputs from clients, from sales, there's technicians, there are tickets coming in, there's emails, there's alerts. A lot of chaos. Even though we got the best dashboards and tools, still feel overwhelmed and burnt out. And a lot of us can feel like an accidental project manager where we kind of got voluntold into it, but don't have the skills, the tools, the process for it. So hence this is mindset, some tactical training, strategies, mindset, and methods for this. Excited to announce our third speaker here, Todd Kane, who has helped hundreds of MSPs, I guess, around the world. Todd, with project service and account management. What I appreciate is that Todd helps in a lot of areas: executive coaching, the leadership process, tools as well, to high level and getting into the weeds as required. So he's been active in the industry for, I guess, around 30 years. He puts out a ton of great content, which you may have seen, over 100 podcast episodes. He's a big giver in various communities, ConnectWise, Tech Drive, running MSP events local here as well. In our last event, he talked about or presented on keeping your service manager sane. And today he's presenting on project management, MSP style. So please join me in making Todd feel welcome.
Thanks, Wim. Appreciate it.
Over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, so this is a topic I'm pretty passionate about. I'm going to keep it condensed. I'll leave a fair bit of time for Q&A. There was a bunch of questions I wanted to jump in on there as well, so we'll catch some things at the end here. So appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys. I'll give you a bit of background on me and sort of where this becomes really relevant. The one thing I really want to sort of focus on and sort of the focus of this talk is project management is difficult. Project management in an MSP environment is even more difficult. And I definitely want to talk about sort of why that is, some of the basic principles of project management, and hopefully help with some of those specific issues that you may tend to see inside an MSP. That we can definitely address. It really doesn't have to be this hard. Is sort of the thesis that I have, right? Let's add some tools, some processes. A lot of the stuff presented by Steve I think is really good base. There maybe be some repeat as well, but lots of really good principles just to give you a great head start and solve some particular problems that you run into in managing projects in this environment. So quick bit of background. Appreciate the intro from Wim about me. It's true, been in this industry for probably 30 plus years. And part of the reason for that is I was the neighborhood nerd that knew computers and tinkered with stuff in the basement. So inevitably the neighbors would invite me over to help them with their computers. And then those neighbors also had businesses and they'd be like, hey, fix this. Like, can you drop by my office and help me with this thing? So before I knew it, really unintentionally ended up with a consulting business before I graduated high school. So I looked after client businesses after school. Wasn't I suppose it wasn't as detrimental as it probably could have been for my social life, but I often wore a tie to school. And there was definitely some benefits because often the phone in the classroom would ring and the teacher would answer it to be like, yeah, uh-huh, okay. And they glance over at me, be like, okay, yeah, no worries. And then they hang up the phone. Hey, Todd, can you go down to the office and help them with something? So I'd get called out of classes to go down and help out with the network or systems, which was sort of nice because then I get to skip out of social studies or math or whatever I happened to be doing at that time. So from there, kind of ended up with this consulting business and got folded into a very large, well, at the time, a small but very, very high growth professional services consulting, sort of a VAR style organization called Longview Systems. And I was employee like 30 or something like that. And we went on this absolute rocket ride of growth. So perspective, this was the early to mid 2000s where oil was $210 a barrel. I grew up in Calgary, so there was money just flowing in the streets, and tons of money to be spent. This was also the rise of VMware, so everything was being virtualized. There was projects all over the place. So we ended up growing at this insane pace where we were literally hiring 20 to 30 people a week for a sustained period, like months at a time. And there was two interesting aspects of that we had to learn quickly is how do you grow a leadership team and how do you contain this level of growth without polluting the culture or crimping sort of the high client satisfaction rate that we wanted to maintain, both in the projects that we were delivering, the service that we provided, and it was an incredible education. So from there, did a couple of turnarounds for some telcos and some professional service consulting organizations. Took was a few of them from bleeding money all over the floor to being profitable, and then ended up at a very recognized MSP in Canada, Fully Managed, which was the birthplace of IT Glue. So I took Fully Managed from this post-merger hangover of two companies, different stacks, different cultures, and kind of smashing these things together. Again, kind of leveraging the same tools and systems that I'd leveraged in previous instances, and took Fully Managed, tripled revenue, doubled headcount, increased gross margin by double digits, and slash turnover by double digits as well. And I sort of turned around and reflected as we'd gotten to this position, realized that the things that I'd kind of taken for granted as just good business practice were not that common in the industry. As I started to go to a lot of industry events, things like that, I recognized the maturity level of a lot of the other service providers in the industry was lower than I had expected. So saw this as kind of an opportunity to take what I'd learned in this toolbox that I'd built and apply that on a one-to-many basis rather than a sort of intrapreneur style building for individual organizations. So that's kind of my background. I think the two things that I would add is before I became sort of like quote unquote expert in the MSP industry, I really sort of grew up in project management space. So it's something that I talk about a lot. It's maybe not something that I'm necessarily recognized in the industry for as broadly, but I was doing projects from way back before when MSP was first sort of like a ragtag business model that some people were experimenting with. So again, like this is a space that I absolutely love and have built kind of multi-million-dollar departments around some of these practices that we'll talk about here, and then kind of added on the intricacies of where those things tend to go sideways in MSPs as well. So, place to start is I want you guys to reflect on what is your current project maturity. Like maybe on a scale of 1 to 5, if you guys want to throw in chat, like where would you rank yourself on a 1 to 5 scale? 1 being, we got a lot to learn, we're trying to figure it out, we want to be better. 5 is we're dialed, we think, we've got some minor improvements and tweaks to make, but otherwise probably kind of industry best in class. I'd be kind of curious sort of where that perspective is for the group here. And the thing that I really want to be clear on here is that this is always a spectrum approach, right? Like there's going to be things that you're doing well. There's going to be things that you're not doing as well. And there's always room for improvement as you iterate on these processes. So, we're seeing kind of 3s, which is typical. I think there's, as I noted, there's definitely room for improvement. And there's a lot of things that people may actually not consider as sort of core to project management, but we really critical for setting you up for success. So some of the things that I tend to talk about a lot, especially as it relates to the MSP industry, is around sort of a statement of work and how you quote things. What's the involvement of the technical people in those issues? Those are some of the things that are not core to project management and project delivery, but are really crucial to get right to make sure that you're structuring the departmental work between kind of sales and the technical delivery and how that interfaces kind of this I guess you would think of it as like a triangle. The client is up here, project delivery down here, sales and account management over here, and there's a lot of interplay that happens here because projects in a lot of ways are kind of a high wire act. They're extremely visible to the business in a way that general sort of IT support isn't, and requires a lot more sort of inputs and a lot more guidance and a lot more reporting in a lot of ways. So I think it's really important to understand the efficiency and how you're leveraging resources, technical resources internally, and how you're structuring the sale of those projects for setting the team up for success. So let's look through kind of the spectrum of approaches here. We got a lot of 3s and 3.5s. So hopefully you guys are not sitting in this chaos scale. I apologize for the PTSD I may trigger for people that have seen server rooms like this. Everyone has seen a server room like this. I don't know. I tend to love sort of this sort of the gory pictures of server rooms and racks that are god awful, and someone needs to get in there and just start hacking stuff away and rewiring stuff. So everybody's seen something like this. This chaos phase, a lot of what I would describe this as is, and I actually had a client kind of quote me this, so I've repeated it ever since. I was talking to him about the importance of projects. We're dialing in service, and wanted to start to improve on the project delivery in their MSP. And he looked at me very honestly and said, "Look, Todd, projects are a means to an end just to make sure that people continue to sign their MSA." And he was dead serious. Like, he did not think about the importance of projects. And I find this a really common approach, is that there's a sort of this scrape together mentality of doing projects off the side of someone's desk in the MSP industry. So hopefully everyone has sort of maybe matured past that phase. But even the people that have, I'm sure you have a memory of when like this was just done in an ad hoc fashion. We have no idea if projects are profitable. There's probably no statement of work to rely on. There's no timelines associated with this. There's very limited planning that goes into these projects. So it's just kind of will and muscle of like trying to get this stuff done. Find sort of the smartest person in the room, ask them to do this project, check in with them at some point to see if it actually got done. And as you can imagine, the results of this are pretty poor. It's a poor client experience. It's generally a poor experience for the techs, and it's a poor experience for the business, honestly. Like, you're not going to make a lot of money doing this. You may service sort of the ends and the means of getting MSAs re-signed, but this is benefiting nobody if you're approaching projects in this ad hoc fashion. And anecdote on this as well, it's been really interesting. My experience in the MSP space, most clients are lost because of service issues, or sometimes account management issues. And in the last year and a half, 2 years, I've heard from more people that have lost clients because of project failures than I have for service failures. And it's sort of this interesting dynamic that I'm not exactly sure how this has happened. I think there's an expectation of service being done a certain way, and it's kind of gotten up to a certain point of maturity in a lot of organizations, but we still haven't sort of spent the time and effort to really polish up the project delivery. And therefore, these are the things that we're now judged on. Is service is okay, but unless you've spent the time to really mature your project delivery space, you're potentially going to lose clients as a result of that. So it's a really, really important aspect of the business to pay attention to. All right. So next sort of like spectrum scale of where people maybe live in here is the getting by phase. I would guess a lot of you on sort of the 2s, the 3s, and maybe the low ends of the 4s on that spectrum. This is probably where you live. Is like, maybe there's a statement of work. There's probably at least a quote, and the semantics of those the differences between these, like what is a bill of material, what is a statement of work, what is a quote, what is a proposal. All of these things can definitely mean different things to different people in the organization. So I think it's also really important just to establish the differences of the language that you use around the work product that you're trying to produce in the organization. So generally, we got some rough dates. Hopefully, we understand maybe when the start date is, and we hopefully have some target towards the end date is. And generally, the projects are profitable. In a lot of MSPs, this is not really something that can be sort of broken out in the P&L. So cost of goods and human labor effort is often not associated directly with the projects group. It's often lumped into service. So unless you're looking at this on a project by project basis, you probably don't know the general profitability beyond just sort of like, I think we got the number of hours close to this, but how much do we make? I'm not really sure, right? Because we haven't spent the time to sort of look at these things and really understand, are we doing well? Have we done the work that needs to be done on time and on budget on a consistent basis? So if it's just happening sometimes by happenstance, that's not sort of enough to really give you the guide wires that you need to be successful going forward here. And in large part, this space suffers from a lack of accountability, where a person may be assigned to a particular deliverable, but whether or not that actually gets completed on time and on budget is usually a reflective practice, right? Like, hey, did this get done? Oh, no, sorry, I just got so busy. There were so many escalations. I didn't get time for that. I'll try and get to it next week. And it's just this constant sort of reflection of failure that we're faced with. And this is one of the things that I think causes the delays of project delivery in MSPs the most. Is that you're constantly reflecting on whether or not something happened as to whether or not planning for it to actually be completed. So this is definitely a space that needs improvement around that sort of accountability and focus on the completion of work in a timely fashion with reporting. So where do we go from there? Hopefully, we're moving towards sort of this on rails state where project delivery and the group as a whole sort of feels a lot more mature, feels like there is a high degree of accountability for a lot of the people that are working in this group, and there's a strong statement of work that has really strong details around what is in scope, what is out of scope, what are the risks, how are we protecting against that, this is the start date, this is the budget. All of those things have a lot more detail around them, and there's generally really strong communication with clients. And this is an area that I think most organizations could improve on a lot. The what I often tell people is, if a client tells you to stop communicating and they're getting tired of hearing from you, like that stands as a success. Like give yourself a pat on the back. You finally achieved this glorious state of the client telling you to shut up, because in a lot of cases that is not going to be the case. A lot of clients that, like I referred to earlier, of when MSPs are losing clients, anecdotally, the issues that I hear about are that it is around communication. So, like a good example of this is a client, weren't a client of mine, but I heard this through sort of a friend of mine that works in a PM organization. And the client called them up and said, "Hey, look, we really like you guys, but I have to let you know that we're not going to be renewing our MSA, and we've already sourced somebody else to switch to. So I'm so sorry, but we're gonna make that change." And they were completely caught off guard by this, and they were like, "What? What happened? Like we're doing great service. It seems like we get along. I thought things were fine." And they said, "Well, yeah, but we had a lot of problems with this project that we had." They were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I heard about that, but from what I heard, like it all got cleaned up and the project was completed. So what's the issue?" And the lady said, honestly, like that's probably true. But what really frustrated me is that I had to call the account manager and figure out what had happened to the project. No one had told me that it was even off track, that it was late, and that there was this failure. And when that actually happened, it was like a ghost town. Just no one would communicate with me, and it really shook my faith as to whether or not you guys are the right partner for us. And if we're not knowing about these types of failures, what else is happening that we're unaware of? So that was really damning, and comes largely down to just communication cadence, which is something that we'll touch on here. So structured resourcing is really, really important. Like, you understand who the people are that you're going to assign to certain projects as they come through the door, and those projects have the bandwidth to be able to complete those things. And then there's consistent profitability. So it's not like a sort of like a magical thing that occasionally happens where a project is profitable, is that like 80 or 70 or 80, hopefully even 90% of the time, those projects are profitable and you can predict that that will happen. So a lot of that comes as just preparation, planning, consistency, reporting, and accountability to the plan of what you've developed for that project. So a really key point to this that I keep coming back to is the preparation around projects, I would say, is probably 50% of your success ratio. If you just sort of follow your way into projects and hope that it gets accomplished, then that's where you really end up in trouble. So the preparation of this, I think, is really, really crucial. So one of the things that MSPs in particular tend to struggle with is resource sharing. And I think I heard some of this sort of noted in some of the questions as well. What we tend to find is, like, most organizations, projects, you're still borrowing from the service desk. So maybe there's some tier threes that occasionally take escalations, but they're also doing projects. And inevitably, what's happening is they're trying to work on these projects, but they're constantly being pinged on Teams and looped into projects and people doing walk-ups and shoulder taps and be like, hey, not sure what to do about this, or this client's really mad. This piece of hardware won't work. I'm not sure what to do here. There was a script we were supposed to run. I don't know how this works. Can you explain this to me? And they're just inundated constantly with interruptions, and it becomes really difficult for them to really sit down and focus a concerted effort around a project time. And what tends to happen is the only time they can get this stuff done is after hours, weekends, and they end up utilizing their own time to commit towards getting projects done. So there's a higher level of risk of burnout and frustration from these people because they feel like they're carrying the whole company. The service desk is wholly dependent on them to make sure that stuff gets done in their view, and they're constantly under pressure because the projects are always delayed and they feel like they're failing at every turn. So this can be incredibly frustrating for people. So how do you structure your time to defend against this? And that becomes really, really crucial. A couple of key points that I would suggest here is what I like to tell people is start thinking of blocks of time for shared resources in sort of 2 and 4 hour increments. So you can think about this as like a tier three that's doing escalations. You come in on Monday, don't schedule project time on Monday morning, right? Maybe not even Monday afternoon, because Mondays in an MSP are very busy. There's a lot of spillover from the weekend, a lot of firefighting. It's just a very busy period. Tuesday, Wednesday, usually pretty good periods. Most of the fires are out. So maybe Tuesday morning or Tuesday afternoon, that project resource is squirreled away for that 4 hour period where their calendar is blocked out. Potentially they work from home or they're locked in a conference room or something somewhere. And there has to be some level of firewalling for them. So the people can't just sort of DM them, or, they have to get approval for escalations through a service manager or a team lead or some type of firewall protection for them, because, techs come from an honest place of this, of wanting to be supportive and helpful of their teammates. So if people are just constantly DMing them, they're going to help them. So think about sort of scheduling those time blocks of focused effort on projects on 2 to 4 hour increments. And this can be really helpful. And then you just sort of trade off those times, right? So you work on some projects, you go back to service. You work on projects, you go back to service. And those blocks of times can be back to back. You can figure out sort of how to schedule that. But just think of it as you can't do both at the same time. So you need to reserve the time for projects, because there's never an urgency around projects unless something has gone really, really wrong. And you don't want to end up in that space in the project world. The other piece is if you do have dedicated resources, in a lot of cases where there are dedicated resources, maybe there's not enough time with projects to actually fill their workload. And you never want to create a culture where people feel that they're above the work that gets done around there. So there should never be an expectation of the project people that they don't help the support desk, right? So like, I got nothing to do. There's no projects. I guess I'm just going to surf YouTube and Reddit today. No, like if you've got time, then go help out with the service desk. Like make yourself visible and note to the service manager or team leads that you are available to pitch in and help out. So that minimizes the cost of downtime, and also gives them, again, some of that visibility around what are the things that are happening here. And maybe there's some projects that we should be spinning up based on sort of the problems that are escalated to me or what's visible to me either way. Okay. All right. So some of the structure of project delivery that's really, really crucial here. The first one that sometimes happens is the kickoff, right? So this is a great important piece of a project, that you actually have some type of structured kickoff. Now, it depends on the size of the project. Often, for smaller bits of work, you probably won't involve the client in a project kickoff. But if it is complex work, say multi-week or multi-month project, then absolutely you should involve the client. And one of the things that can be really helpful in a kickoff is to, like, in almost gory level of detail, go through the statement of work. And one of the things that I think is crucially important if you're going to review a SAO with a client on a complex bit of work is pointing out to them what is in scope and what is out of scope. And people, I think, overthink this. They want to have out of scope and try to list absolutely anything that they can think of. I would actually take the umbrella approach here and just say anything that is not explicitly in scope is defined as out of scope. Um, then there's some out of scope things that you should naturally have in there, like training around some of the products or projects that you're delivering. Like you're probably not responsible for the training of the end users, and that's an important thing to note. Like, have you thought, Mr. Client, have you thought about how these people are going to be able to utilize this new system that we're rolling out? Because it's not in our scope of this project to educate them around those things. There can be risks involved of like, hey, we're going to need access to your data center on Friday at 4 p.m. on this date. Like, do you have people available to let us in and escort us to do that work? We need licenses, we need passwords, whatever the case is, like making sure that the client is not creating a systemic risk to the project without being aware of it. So it's really important to have them involved in this process. And if not, then at the very least, you want to meet with the people that are delivering on this project and clearly state to them, here's what's in scope, here's what's out of scope, here's the timelines, here are sort of the things that we need to get done, here's the expectation of reporting and communication to me as a project manager. One of the questions I'll address sort of inline here, Darren asked a question about setting an expectation around the start of a project. This is one of my sort of little hacks that I really like around expectations with account management. What I typically suggest, and hopefully this addresses your question, Darren, if not, we can get back to this in Q&A. What I'd like to suggest is anytime that someone is selling a project, you tell the client that we will get started in 4 to 6 weeks, just as a blanket statement. And there's two ways that this is helpful. One, like there's often a lot of procurement that has to happen. Like maybe you need to buy equipment, maybe you need to spin up some cloud infrastructure, maybe stuff needs to get purchased. There's approvals that have to happen. It's very unlikely that a lot of projects will start next week, right? And that seems to be this expectation that tech is sort of dropped with. Like the AM sweeps in, says, hey, here's what I told the client we would do. Told them we get it done by next week. You guys can work that out, right? See you later. And like that is a really unfair expectation. Whereas if they say, our typical timeline for startup is 4 to 6 weeks. Here are some of the reasons why that may sound long, but is necessary. So it sets the client's mind at ease. AM feels like they have more control over the conversation. And then if you're able to start up in 2 or 3 weeks, great. Like you've under-promised and over-delivered. Versus, sure, we'll get that started next week. And then 4 weeks later, it's like, well, equipment's finally here. So now we can get started. Client's already mad, right? So that can be a really important part to kind of structuring that kickoff and setting yourself up for success, making sort of the scope very clear. And that sets you up in a better position for scope change and things like that. Actually doing change controls that you bill for if it's actually out of scope, which is easier if you've actually explained to the client what is in scope, what is out of scope. Okay. Next important piece is comms rhythm. As I noted, this is probably one of the most important pieces around project delivery that is often overlooked, right? So one of the key points to setting up a really good comms rhythm is it enhances trust and value perception, right? And this, you can kind of relate this to tickets in some ways. If a bit of work gets done and no one knows about it, it creates no value, right? So, hey, this project got delivered, super fantastic. Person that did it never said anything or never reported to anybody. So the business doesn't know that it was completed. The client doesn't know that it was completed. Where's the value, right? So, and it helps to demonstrate this on a weekly basis. It was what I typically suggest. If it's a multi-day project, maybe you communicate the beginning of the week and then the end of the week to close up and report. If it's a multi-week project, you should potentially, depending on scale and risk of the project, be meeting with the client on a Teams call, sometimes in their office. If it's high wire, super complex, lots of internal parties involved, that sort of stuff. But at the very least, send an email once a week on here was what we got done, here are any risks, these are the things that are scheduled, and let us know if you have any questions. That is a bare minimum expectation of your comms rhythm that you should be setting up with the client. The other part is around a comms rhythm. Well, an error that I see a lot of people do is that they'll get the client and the internal techs on the client on that call at the same time and basically run a live status update where they're asking the tech for feedback on how things have gone with the client on that same Teams call. And like this is a really dangerous approach and doesn't demonstrate sort of a lot of courtesy or maturity to the client. Whereas free that tech up to go do the work that they need to do. They can send you a report, or you can meet with them for 10 or 15 minutes to get a status update. And then, you can go meet with the client and just deliver the news to them directly around status of the project, right? So project close is really important. And again, this is an area that totally gets skipped, right? Like there's a lot of good intent around this. Steve kind of noted this as well around even the project close for a group that is really intentional about project management fell to the wayside, and this happens consistently. This is probably one of the most important practices that you can practice internally for a sort of lean approach, Kaizen approach of perpetual improvement around your project process. So you want to be able to collect faster is one thing. Where I've seen a lot of organizations, they're billing after projects are completed, which is I don't understand that. Like it's to me, it's absolutely crazy. So at the least, hopefully you're doing 50% upfront and 50% on close. My preference personally is value of the project is paid in advance of the project even started. But it's a different discussion we can get into some other time. But the project close, like that 50% on close, a lot of organizations I've seen get held hostage for this, where like the client is holding things up or they're sort of debating as to whether or not the project is actually closed. And have a project closure meeting to formalize this process and say, next stage is for us to send this final bill and you guys need to pay this. And to have that as an interactive meeting where they may be like, hang on, we disagree. Here are some of the reasons. Well, at least you're at the table to have this discussion. You're not constantly chasing this person through email for 3 weeks trying to get paid for the project that has been completed as far as you're concerned. Okay. The other piece that's super important here is that Kaizen of like, what did we do well? What did we do not so well? And what should we feed back into the system for the future so that we set ourselves up for success? Simple examples are, we quoted 12 hours for this server build. And the last 3 times we've done this, it took 15 to 16 hours. Let's adjust our quoting, right? Like, let's make this 15 hours for our future quotes on work so that we're more aligned with what the work actually takes, right? So, we're constantly sort of caught in this doom loop of our expectations for the time of the delivery of this project is out of whack, but we keep sort of signing ourselves up for the same misery every time without making those adjustments. And then the last piece that's super crucial on project closure is never close a project until someone has verified the documentation is completed. The number of times that I've seen people say, "Oh yeah, it's the project's mostly done. I just need to do some documentation. You can close it. I'll do that later this week." Project stays open until you've delivered that documentation. Someone has verified it, because the number of times those things go undocumented and then service is trying to firefight something that doesn't even exist in the client infrastructure anymore because documentation wasn't updated. That's no good for anybody. So using that project close as a good bookend to make sure that that problem doesn't occur is really crucial. Right. So one of my favorite of things to think about, from a project perspective, but just generally business and life, is be future focused. I have this really strong opinion about projects and project meetings in particular, and I'm sorry if I offend some of you, but the most painful meeting that I audit when I'm working with clients is the project management meeting. And this may sound familiar to you guys, where you have like 6 people that all pile into a conference room or a Teams call, and basically the project manager or the department leader is meeting with each person one-on-one in a round robin fashion, but only those 2 people are talking. Only those 2 people need to actually be involved. And the rest, everybody else is sort of heads down working on something else, sort of maybe half listening or completely checked out altogether. This is a horrible waste of time. So I would much prefer to see 15 to 20-minute one-on-ones between the PM and all those individual resources, and then, send out some summary if you want, even to the rest of the group. It's good to create some of that visibility and around what other people are working on, but doing it in this sort of collaborative, semi-collaborative fashion where you're kind of hijacking everyone's time once a week to have everyone sit in this room or in this meeting where they really have nothing to contribute outside of the 10 minutes that they end up speaking to the person hosting that meeting. It's a terrible, terrible waste of time. The other piece of this is be future focused and never allow stories to be told in this meeting. Again, like one of the frustrating things that I see in a project status meeting is like, hey, Chris, like, where are we at with this project? And they're like, oh, well, okay, we didn't get this done because so and so said that this was going to happen and that didn't work. And then the vendor, like, they were unavailable and they pushed this ticket for the following week. And then, like, 5 minutes later, everyone's like, wait a minute. You basically said no, right? Like, no, it's not been done. So what do we need the story for? I'm not terribly interested in what happened. I want to understand what we need to do in order to make this complete so that we can move forward and execute on this project. So in a very polite way, I think you want to introduce this in your project management meetings as no story rule, right? So if anyone starts telling a story about why something happened, you can say, "Sorry, let me stop you. If we want to talk about this offline, I think we can maybe talk about that after or schedule a meeting to review this if there's some important bits. Otherwise, let's focus on what we can accomplish. What do we need to change? What do we need to adjust? What do we need to resource in order to make sure that this gets delivered on time?" Right? So you're kind of radically shifting everyone back to being future focused in all your interactions. Like the stories just don't matter in a lot of ways. It's a personal anecdote, so you don't want to be rude to people about it, but like let's be professional, let's focus on completion basically. Okay? So that I love that one. That's, I think, super important, saves everybody a ton of time. All right, PM tools. So I'll make a small adaptation to what I typically say because top left is the exception here. The number of times that people want to stray from their stack in project management, I find really frustrating. Where like techs are saying, "Oh, well, I didn't update my projects and I didn't enter my tickets because the PM tool in Autotask or ConnectWise is garbage, and that's the reason none of this is being completed." Well, that doesn't tend to be true, right? Like, oh, if we just had Asana or Monday, then like this would be easier. That never happens. The number of times that I see a department or a lead or an owner get convinced that purchasing some third-party PM tool will solve all of their project management problems, like it just never happens that way. So this is what I love about top left is it creates that visibility and the light touch to be able to manage the tickets in a project, but it still does a two-way sync. So you're not creating silos of truth, right? Where projects happen over here. So we need to do double time entry, right? Because I entered time for the project, so we have project reporting, but I also need to enter my time for my timesheets because we also need to understand, client agreements and maybe the project was sold in a quote there and has an agreement for that. And this swivel chair mentality of having people enter time in multiple tools is just crazy town. It's a recipe for disaster, and it creates this silo for reporting where I have to report on projects over here, but I have to report on service over there. So maintain your stack and stay inside of your stack. You can make like Autotask and ConnectWise project management modules are okay. They're fine, but they're not good, right? So to be able to create a layer or a skin on top of that with top left to make things go faster and just have a lighter touch to be able to manage those tickets is actually incredibly beneficial. A couple of other pieces around this is minimize project complexity. The number of times I see people building project plans in a PSA with like 80 different tickets associated with it, multiple phases, like they're really, really overcomplicating stuff. And this becomes a PM hell and also sort of tech delivery hell when you're assigned 40 tickets for a single project. And it just feels overwhelming, despite the fact that all that work needs to be done. I think it's just a level of complexity that is not necessary and creates no benefit for anyone, really. So, what is the minimal number of tickets that you need to create so that you do have some visibility around reporting? So, you're not saying like, whole project is 40 hours, let's create 2 tickets. The first ticket, instead of taking 20 hours, took 38 hours. The other one took 20. But we don't really have a sense of why the other one was so over budget, right? Like large blocks of time, maybe in that 2 to 4 hour increment, you want to break these things out to tickets or associated types of work, but minimize the complexity as much as reasonable so that you still have good reporting and it's easier to kind of assign these tickets and report on those tickets and get them completed. And then the other piece is focus on building templates. A lot of people, especially in the MSP industry, tend to think that the work that they do is somehow unique in every client, and that is just not true. There's a lot of repeat work that we do. Onboarding is a great example. Like build a template, continue to iterate it. Server deployments, workstation deployments, user creation, whatever those complex bits of work that you do a lot of, you should be creating templates for them so that you can continue to iterate and improve upon them. And then it becomes easier to just sort of manage those things and see them inside top left to be able to provide a better project management experience and a better tech kind of delivery experience as well. All right. So, quick summary here. Pitfalls to avoid. If you take anything away from this talk today, don't let techs manage their own projects. Okay. There is this weird psychology that happens with anybody, and this is almost never a sort of a malintent thing, where like we are able to justify things retroactively or justify things to ourselves in the future that we would never allow someone else to sort of pull the wool over our eyes on. Having that independent accountability is really, really crucial. And I think we overthink sort of the level of complexity around this. If you're actually a designated PM in the organization, fantastic. You should be pretty good at this, and you will have a portfolio of projects that you look after. So this shouldn't be a problem. Having a project coordinator to help you out with this at scale becomes a lot easier. But if you're a small organization just trying to be scrappy with this, don't overthink what a PM sort of does at that level. Having a coordinator who just follows a system is actually a great place to start before you get into the complexities of, resource management and the complexity of project delivery. So anybody really can sort of do that project coordination phase. It can be another tech, it could be the office manager. Just have them follow those systems and make sure that you hold those people accountable to the things that they say they're going to do from a project delivery standpoint. Okay. The other one is not managing deliverables. So this is like having timelines, that accountability issue, being diligent about this is when we said we would do this bit of work and that actually got done. Right. So really being this is sort of the meat and potatoes of project management of we know when it starts, we know when it ends, and someone has reported to us, right, around the delivery of that work. So again, like that, this quote that I love is work done and unreported is work undone. So you want to make sure that you're assigning the reporting of deliverables, not necessarily the completion of deliverables. The distinction is that if someone doesn't report to you on a particular timeline, then you can check in with them and say, hey, this bit of work is due on Friday. I asked for a report on Wednesday. It's end of day Wednesday. I don't have that report. So, what's up? Did it get completed? Oh, no, sorry, I got busy with escalations. Okay. First thing, Thursday morning, this needs to be completed. Let me know when it's done so that we can square this off before Friday for its due date, right? Very different approach, but it's a light sort of a touch and just a slight shift around this. The last piece is cold handoffs. So when a project gets completed, there needs to be sort of some feedback that goes to the service group around what I would do at the MSP that I ran is whoever was responsible for that project would show up to our daily team huddle in service and report like, hey, this is the project that we completed at client A by ABC. This is the things that have changed. Documentation is here. Here are some of the issues that you could see today as a result of this. And here's the point of contact, the escalation point, the person that you should talk to if we're seeing major issues. This goes a long way to sort of combating what we often see as this friction between project delivery and service delivery, where service delivery feels like project has no accountability. They go in and break a bunch of stuff, and then service has to pick up the pieces. And that's generally not true. But if without sort of this accountability mechanism of good communication between the groups, that natural sort of animosity will build, right? So you need to create this mechanism of visibility and feedback between those two groups. So that's really important to do that service handoff once you've completed a project. All right. That is it from me. I do have a project management course for MSPs specifically. It goes through sort of a lot of these basic fundamentals as well as that sales kickoff and the account management interplay. A lot of the things that are really, really specific to MSPs. I kind of call it's like PMP light. it's all the basics that you need without a lot of sort of the fluffy details. So if you have interest in either signing yourself up or someone on your team for some project management for MSPs, you can scan that QR or just go to training.evolvedmgmt.com and check that out there. Well, thanks, everybody.
Wow. That was awesome. Probably everyone's feeling like a fire hose with that. So a ton of wisdom and such in there. So thanks for that. I'm gonna go through a little bit here, and then we'll get to the questions. And are you able to hang around a little bit past 5, Todd?
I can. Yep.
Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen again. All right, so if this was useful and you want help to implement this, keep it alive, because it's one thing to get inspired and motivated, but falls off quickly, especially over a weekend, is we have an Agile bootcamp offering. So this is something we've done before, Agile MSP training, which Matt Fox has run. And we used to sell this for $1,500 for a team, just for individual company. But today, just changing that, so it's $299 per person, or $1,050 for a team of 5. So discounted from that, very high value. So it's 4 weeks. Week 1 is introduction. Week 2, Agile project management. Moving on to service delivery, which there's overlap with project there as well. And then a focus for engineers. And the best is to bring in your team. There's one thing to go through the training yourself, but to cascade that forward, it's great to have more managers, coordinators there. So we would do this as a length of 90 minutes. Debate a bit of time to review, let's say what we went through today or the previous session, go through the content. It's about 45 minutes, and then questions and coaching after that. So breaking that down a little bit more on the learning objectives. Actually, I'm not going to read all of this. By introduction, kind of covering a little bit of what Melvin went today to reinforce that we're high work in progress, kills productivity. The service delivery, how to triage and dispatch, the impacts there, how to fix those neglected tickets, and then project portfolio, and really getting into how do you apply these concepts on your top left boards with your PSA, ConnectWise, or Autotask, and then bringing it to life for engineers as well. So if you want to do that, email Mohammed, who's our customer success manager. He's on today as well. Iman@topleft.team, just saying, hey, I'm in for Agile MSP Bootcamp, and he'll set up the billing for you. And that would start in 2 weeks. And do that every week at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. All right. And then feedback. Actually, let me put this in the chat. Pasting this in the chat here. And then there's a survey link. I'll give you a clickable link as well, or you can scan the QR code for how this went today. Quick survey. Really appreciate the feedback so we can make the next one better. All right. So Q&A discussion. I'm sure there's a lot of questions there. Any questions, I guess, for any of our speakers? For Todd, you see any conflicts with any of these things? What's the burning question around implementing this?
I've got a comment.
Yep.
Yeah, the stuff that Todd covered, we went through exactly the same stuff. So people judge you on projects, be very clear in your scope of works, understand the differences between your proposal, scope of works, all the other things that we say, and especially the what's included, what's not included. Like I've seen people's contracts that are 45 pages. We've actually got a feedback from our clients going, your proposals and your scope of works are so easy to read. Why? Because there's not 45 pages of conditions. Right? It's just what's in and the rest is out. Great advice.
Yeah, so just wanted to say thanks to everybody for your contributions. It's very difficult as an MSP from a traditional perspective of like project management to like start thinking agilely about how to go about doing your work and getting stuff done. Oh, yeah, start my video. 1 second. There we go. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey for me in terms of working with MSPs. Traditionally, project management was something that was done via waterfall, and we all know from how well waterfall works. And it's just really, really nice to get some really great practical information on how to implement it, how to get it out there. I think the first gentleman that was speaking, Melvin, in terms of like just continuing to try stuff and iterate, failing fast, and it's really, really just super beneficial to hear all of this. So I appreciate all of your shares. Thank you very much. No questions really for me, but like feedback, like this was very, very good. Thank you.
Todd, I've got a question. You mentioned, learning about scope of works and actually how to improve your scope of works. You mentioned along those lines. I guess, iterating the scope of works and making sure that we get it spot on is really important. Do you have any good ideas and ways that we can implement something to get that feedback going back and make sure that our scope of works is improving all the time?
Yeah. So, are you thinking about sort of like on time, on budget delivery, or are you thinking about sort of the T's and C's specifically?
So what we find is happening is that the scope of work that is happening from our client services team, when it gets to the technology side and we're actually implementing it, they seem to be a little bit off, and we need to give them the feedback. So we want to make sure that the actual processes that they're putting down, what's included, what's not included is right, making assumptions on, what's going to be expected from the customer side. I'm probably not maybe too many of the T's and C's, but
Okay, perfect.
more just the actual process. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the best way to do that, in my opinion, is the project close, right? Like those are exactly the types of things that you want to review, is what went well, what didn't go well, what can we improve? So you're reviewing on time, on budget delivery. So, for example, like most of the project tickets that we had got completed. But like the sort of the anecdote that I noted is like, we keep quoting this server build at 12 hours. It takes 15. Like, why do we keep doing this? And what you'll see a lot early on. So like one of the things that I have in the project course, that's like one of my favorite sort of tools and practices around this is a pick menu, right? For building a bill of materials, where like you have actually set budgeted times for how long something takes. And then you use that as sort of the source of truth for quoting. Because what you see in a lot of cases is if you ask a tech to, especially a senior tech, to quote a project and they're not necessarily the one delivering it, they're going to do things a lot faster than somebody else, right? So like they quoted this at 8 hours. It took the person like that was not terribly confident in doing this bit of work 20. So that's a problem, right? So if you're doing that after action review or that project closure, you can look at those things and say like, why did this go over budget? Was this just sort of a weird anomaly that we just don't think will recur, or do we need to adjust the quoting mechanism to make sure that this happens and gets quoted for the right cost in the future? The other is like risks and failures. So like we didn't identify like this being a problem. This is something that we should think about in future projects, right? So like I don't know what some examples would be off the top of my head, but like licensing requirements or security requirements in Azure, right? Like, oh, we need to make sure that these things exist before we can actually proceed on implementing these parts of the project, right? Otherwise, that becomes a sort of a showstopper. And either that's done like before the project actually kicks off, or it's at least sort of a like check and verify before you proceed through the rest of the project, right? So that to me is the biggest component of that, is just that project closure is where all of that stuff gets dumped on the floor around like what didn't go well, how do we protect ourselves from these problems in the future?
Just as an interesting side note, would you put extra scope in the actual project to perform that retrospective or post-project review, or would it just be an admin task that you would put afterwards? Is this something you would be, adding in as actual
it's
scope by
absolutely
scope.
billable to the project, right? Like work
Yeah.
done has to be paid for, right? Like, and if people want to push back against this, they need to understand, like, if you had an internal team doing this, like you would be paying their salary for them to spend time doing this, right? It's incredible to me as in MSP worlds how sort of reticent they are to pay for or bill for project management. Honestly, like this is one of the reasons that I'm such an advocate for fixed fee projects is it's the easiest way to get project management paid for. Because 9 times out of 10, you're dealing with an SMB office of like 20 accountants, and like you put like X amount of dollars and X amount of hours for project management. And they're like, ooh, that's kind of a lot. Like maybe, Jerry on our team, he's pretty good at this. Maybe he could keep account for this. Like, well, let's scratch that project management line. We can do this internally. No, that is not going to happen. Right. So like you need to bury that line somewhere else. And quite frankly, like again, that quoting tool that I have, it automatically defaults 15 to 18% for project management. So however many hours it's going to take you to build that project, it automatically adds in 15% of hours for you to have that project management. Plus it adds 10% for contingency. Right. And those like so what you would be doing is building that time around, say, documentation. And documentation could include the after action review, that project closure. So 100% it should be billable time. And keep in mind, this is not crazy amount of time. Like we're not talking about a 4-hour meeting. Like this is probably 30 minutes, maybe 45 if it's something complex. So it's not a lot of time, but all the more reason that you should do it because there is an incredible amount of value that comes out of that, right?
Thanks.
Yeah. Matt had a question. You got your hand up.
Yes, sorry about that. I actually remembered my question after all of my, emoting about how great this was. Do any of y'all use like Agile project charters? Do you feel that more information as part of the conversation ahead of time is better, or do you feel that like a better definition of done for the project is more important than necessarily all of the minutia that's going to happen?
I can pick that one up. So we have 2 kickoffs. We have an internal kickoff and an external kickoff. And basically, we define definition of done or what does success look like. So what success looks like, we've got to do this, this, and this and get that outcome. So it could be a statement. It could be 3 bullet points, but it's got to be a target. And even the engineers that would have scoped the project forget what the success is. So we have to spell it out at the kickoff, internal kickoff. We have to spell it out again during the external kickoff, and we have to spell it out again during the project, right? This is larger projects because people literally forget. So if you want to go with something large and complex, they're going to guarantee to forget that. Keep it small and simple and repeat it. That's how we do it.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Text or unmute?
Since Melvin's still awake at 1 in the morning, I'll ask him a question. So Melvin, with sort of changing culture, okay, like you talked about, how you got to get people to do things. So what's your biggest tip there to get things going when you need to put a change into an organization? How do we start?
Depending on, depending on the company and the like, but my experience usually is people like to run a small proof of concept with one team and see how it goes, right? And then if they make it work in that team and they're like, oh, we like, we like the visibility of the Kanban board, we like how the team is doing, then you can start copying that to other, right? So usually I get a lot of, we give you one team, show us what you can do, and then, we want this for the rest. Okay, cool, there we go. But that's usually, unless you have a senior manager or director who has done this before in another place, and then they're like, let's do a big bang. But usually that's not the case. Even with that, they would say, well, let's show people what we can do, and then we start from there, right? That's usually my experience.
Cool. So start with like a proof of concept or a
fail fast, right? So okay, in a proof of concept will be like, okay, let's visualize things on a Kanban board. Let's have a, if I need to run it, let's have a daily stand-up. Try to understand what that board is about. If there is a backlog of work or tickets, let's review the queue, bring that queue back to life, because, for example, usually it's like, oh, they have tickets since 2019 or something like that, like 300 tickets, all tickets is a pain, right? So, okay, let's prioritize, let's see what we need to close, because all tickets probably don't need to be there, right? And then start going, right? Teach the team a bit on how to work as a team, and you will see things changing, right? So you don't need a lot to change it. As soon as you get the team to work in that way of daily stand-ups, taking accountability, visualizing things, and getting the board up to date, you will start seeing a lot of change on the team, right? Because one of the things that the Kanban board will give you is, or it will give the team the self-management. That means that the team is, people on the team are going to start checking what the others are doing, right? So there is nowhere to hide, right? So you know what, we are responsible for this, and I promised to do this since yesterday, and I haven't done it, right? So now they start taking accountability, and then that helps you. You don't need to be like with a stick telling people what to do, right? So they are controlling each other, right? And then slowly you get things going, right? You can add more. You can add backlog refinements, to review the tickets, understand what the tickets are about, probably write a bit more on the description of the ticket, and probably size it as a team as well, because a lot of the time you were talking about estimates, and that's the biggest challenge that everybody has. If you get an estimate from a senior person, then that's a senior person. But what if you have a junior person working on that? The estimate is going to be different, right? So when they estimate together, you will get a better estimate, because it's going to consider everybody in the team, right? So it's a bit more accurate, and you start going from there, right? And then you can replicate the same to the rest of the teams.
Thanks, Melvin.
I'll maybe piggyback on that. Couple of points to add. I think it's that iterative approach, I think, is really key, Melvin. Like kind of taking an agile approach to implementation, essentially, right? The other pieces I would suggest is statement of expectations of like, and what's in it for me are really, really important. So like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And like the what's in it for me for your team, like how does this help them? Like, sure, like great company wants to make this change. How does this help my life? Right? Like you want to be considerate of those things and actually communicate it to them. And then it's really difficult for people to sort of be negative about things that they see their fingerprints on. So as much as you can involve them in the development and the thinking through of the process, then they're much more likely to sort of adapt to that way of thinking. And it's like, oh yeah, like if you just say, hey, here's how we're going to do this starting next week, there might be a lot of sort of recoiling and resistance and negativity around that. If you say like, here's what I'm thinking, this is what I'd like to see happen. Here's what I think it would do for you guys and it'd do for the company. Like, what do you think? Like, what do we think we should change? How can we implement this? What are the things that we should consider? And the more that they contribute to it, the less likely they are to be able to say, oh, this won't work because, hey, like your fingerprints on this, you helped make it, right?
Yeah, and you may need to babysit them. I always say the same, right? So, okay, I will move the tickets for you on the Kanban board for this week. Once you learn, and I know it sounds silly, right? Because it's like, how difficult could it be to drag something, but oh, it takes too much time. Okay, so I do it for you this week. Next week, you do it yourself, right? They play with, you're dealing with change. People don't like change, so you need to be patient until it happens, right? So I show you how it works. I do it for you. I babysit you. That's it. Now you grow up. You do it. They will find
Maybe
a
I've
way
got a
to-
question.
Yep. Sorry.
No, you're good. Maybe for Steve. Not too sure. So earlier we saw that the Scrum. Here's how you can do a backlog. You can. Here we go. Start my video. Got it. Here's how we do a backlog. The planning. You review it. You allocate tasks. You do a retrospective at the end. But I didn't quite connect that flow with delivering technical projects in MSP. How do you do that in those teams? Maybe I missed it or I didn't really connect the dots.
Sorry, Jason, could you clarify that? So
Sure.
What do you mean by how do you?
So specifically delivering projects in an MSP using an Agile methodology. Now I got the concepts at the start, but yeah, I really just didn't connect where those concepts are put to the ground in an MSP. So how do you form the teams? And it's obviously too big to just discuss in a Q&A session, but maybe you can say, no, Jason, just re-listen to what I said. It'll probably click if you listen to it a second time. I just didn't get that connection. So I'm hoping to be able to get a little bit of a guidance here.
Okay, so how to do it in an MSP? That's the question, in a managed service provider environment.
Through Agile, yep.
And I'm presupposing the question comes from, but we mainly don't do projects and we're doing projects now, or is it we've?
No, we are.
I think it comes from a perspective that you're still somewhat talking about waterfall-based projects, but working in an agile method with those waterfall projects. And I think what Jason's asking is, are we actually talking about working in an agile methodology, or are we talking about waterfall projects in an agile way, right?
Yes.
You use agile ceremonies to help you run your waterfall projects, right? So you have tasks, right? What a waterfall project, that's okay, but at the end of the day, you have a project plan or a list of tasks that you need to deliver, right? So there is a sequence and all that, that's all nice, but what happened after that? Once you have your plan, you need to get people to do the work. So what we are saying is get that work. I would tell project managers the same, right? So you have a project plan, let's say in any tool, let's say Microsoft Project, Smartsheet, whatever is the tool you're using, or get that, throw it into a Kanban board, right? And that will help you to visualize what's going on. And then you start controlling flow and use agile ceremonies to help you run that project, where you get daily stand-ups. You can get, okay, you know what? I have an agile waterfall project, but I want to plan the next 2 weeks of tasks. I want to know my team capacity for the next 2 weeks, holidays, everything, because you have people assigned to your project. Okay, can we do this? Yes, okay, let's try to deliver these 2 weeks, right? At the end of the 2 weeks, we plan again, right? So yes, you do have a plan, but you're trying to make sure that you're able to deliver that plan. So you're getting all the power of Agile into your delivery, if that makes sense, right?
I agree with Melvin. So it's not about going from waterfall to agile. Most projects, because as MSPs, we quote a project, right? Now, it could be time materials, but generally we tend to quote projects. We're not talking about going away from waterfall. As Melvin said, you're overlaying agile principles on how you run that waterfall project. The only time you can be fully agile, in my opinion, is if you're developing software and instead of waiting half a year to put out 20 features, you put out one feature at a time. That's what Agile is originally about, right? So you don't wait to do the big bang thing. But as MSPs, we quote something, we've got to deliver something. There's no iterative portion afterwards where we sit there and the project runs forever and we keep improving it. We have a start and a stop. So we're not going away from waterfall. We're just overlaying Agile. It's still waterfall. The project still has to be completed.
In a waterfall project, the other problem you have is you run, let's say you have a 6-month project, cool. You run the whole entire 6 months and you do lessons learned at the end of the 6 months. You hope those lessons learned are going to help you for the next project. But what I'm saying is, okay, you know what? In the meantime, all the problems you have, you didn't resolve them. So what we are doing is every 2 weeks, spend an hour or half an hour retrospective to understand what's working with the team that you have for that project and what's not working. And then you can improve for the next one. So what you're trying to do is constantly improve the way of working for that team that you created for that project. That will help you to deliver the project faster, better, and remove any problems that you get.
Okay, so thank you for that. I do get that concept that, hey, you've still got the waterfall constraints for the time frame, sure, and the project execution. You've got to come up with that non-iterative, package at the end of it. Is there a more agile, or is there extra reading that I can do, or whatever, to understand how to really use resourcing better? It's not just the ceremonies, I'd imagine. It's about using resourcing concurrently on the same thing, or swapping skills around to be able to achieve that same one project.
That's easy. Have a look at Wim in the background and the amount of books he has there. Wim has a list on his website of which ones to read, but we could be even more specific and we can update that list. I'm happy to take Wim's list and just add one or two and replace one with newer versions.
One
Wim,
thing
you
that
want to
companies
share?
are trying to do is they are trying to stop assigning people to projects, because the way it works in waterfall is you keep, oh, we have a project, we assign an engineer. We have another project, oh, okay, we assign 20% of this engineer to that project. And at the end of the day, you have one person assigned to 5, 6 different projects. And the only thing they are doing is content switching constantly, right? And then they don't belong to a team, they belong to a team in a project. But so that's kills productivity. So what we do is we try to have stable teams, and then we have projects and we try to prioritize the work for that project and pass it to the teams, right? And those teams can have Kanban boards, and then in that way, you are optimizing flow, right? Because instead of people content switching, they work on what is the highest priority, but they work as a team, right? So I always tell project managers the same. If you have people working for you, don't ask for a name of a person, ask for a team, right? So I need, I don't know, work from whatever type of skill. Well, that type of skill belongs in a team. Okay, pass that work for the team, and you will get more people working on that, and they will take it out. So that's what companies are doing. They are inverting the way of, instead of assigning people to projects, we have a list of projects and we pass work into the different teams, right?
Thanks, Melvin. Thanks, Steve.
Change, yes, but
I would overlay
Hey.
on that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, mate.
I was just going to say another resource. I'll just reiterate what Wim said. Is the Agile Bootcamp that we're offering starting February, and I'll take you through a lot of specific stuff about implementing Agile specifically in MSPs, and also how to make use of Top Left as a tool to actually start being able to do those in an efficient way.
That's the good answer. Get Matt to tell you how to do it.
I have one more question. You're talking about overlaying Agile over waterfall so that you can, like you said, use a team, etc. But let's say you've got a deliverable within the waterfall. Would you then use Agile principles to actually complete that one deliverable? So you have Agile overlaying the project, waterfall so that you know what deliverable needs to be done at a certain time. Would you ever use an Agile framework to actually do that deliverable, to actually get that deliverable completed? I don't know, maybe if I'm kind of barking up the wrong tree, but to use an iterative response to kind of complete that deliverable if it's a large one, if it's a pretty large deliverable part.
Work with banks and they deliver mainframes, and you don't deliver a mainframe in 2 weeks, right? So they take probably a year or so. But all the planning, all the different phases, you know, from analysis, design, and build, and they do it with Agile. And the main reason, and they use Kanban boards. The main reason is because there is so many things to coordinate that it's easy when you get people working for you and updating boards so that each team is updating their own tasks so that you don't need to be chasing around, right? So you have these ceremonies to make sure you're on track. I think, as I was saying earlier, right? So rather than having an hour a week for an update to find out what is the status of your task, and maybe sometimes people cannot make it, and you wait 2 weeks until you get an update, and then you find that that task, nobody worked on it, or it was blocked, and you didn't know. You find it every day because you have a daily stand-up, and whatever happens, you immediately know, and you can take action. Or you go to a board and you are like, oh, that's blocked. Okay, let me resolve that block, right? So you go with that, right? So if you ask me, and be myself a project manager, before I would run it in this way, right? So it made my life easier. I have full control, visibility, and whenever something happens, I can react immediately, right? I don't need to find it a week or two. I remember my days as a waterfall. It was like, well, by the time you find that something is blocked, you lost too much time, right? So now you need to try to catch up with that. That's not efficient, right?
To answer the, could you use the iterative approach within a project? If it's big enough and if there are unknowns. Sometimes we go and do a project that's never been done. Guess what? things are not going to work the way you expected. We're going to learn stuff. And we might be implementing something thinking it's going to work in a particular way, but the reality is it ends up working a different way. So we have to make iterative changes to the actual plan. Now, we always go into those sorts of projects is either we know what to do exactly and we've done it before, here's a quote, or it's like, you guys want us to do something new, we know 90%, but that 10% is a variable. We'll also quote it differently, but we'll treat it differently. We'll treat it like a proof of concept within a project, because we've got to actually get that thing working that no one's ever done before. Then you can use full agile iterative, let's try something, let's change it, let's make it better and improve it rather than trying to get it all done in 1 week or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So it depends on the size.
Yeah, so I was looking for. Thank you.
Nice.
Okay, so last question, I guess, Lynn, I know you turned on your video. I don't know if you had a question. You're trying to sneak in there.
No, I was going to ask a question, but that was answered already. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, awesome. All right, we're over 50 minutes past. I guess just to wrap this up, is there maybe just a bit of a retrospective? What are you all going to do different next week? What are you going to implement from this? What are some action items that people are going to go look at doing or are committing to doing?
Yeah, I'll speak. Sure. I'll straight away take that lesson that I learned about multitasking, because it's just not real. Multitasking isn't real. You work sequentially by the looks of that. So I'll take that to my team. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Post away in the chat.
I intend to work out the no story rule in my meetings.
Cut out the emotion. Yeah. Too much drama. Yeah.
Looking at the team stages, trying to get the team past the storming stage.
Mm. Very good. And what would you tell another MSP who was not here today about why they should be here? Because we're going to be running this again. So what would you say to another MSP?
I would say don't wait 10 years to learn all of the lessons yourself. If you've got pain points, turn up, you'll get most of your answers here, and the rest will be within the group and continually engaging.
Yeah. Anyone else creating some FOMO, fear of missing out for other people? Yeah. Finding our bottlenecks and optimizing. Yep. Theory of constraints. That's what the Phoenix Project book gets into. I highly recommend that one. The covers, I got it on my wall here. Plans to resolve bottlenecks. Yep. Okay. Well, we could keep going. But I want to get home to my family. So let's, I think this has been really good. And we'll be doing this again. So thank you to everyone for being here, being part of this. Thank you to Melvin and Steve and Todd for contributing. Very grateful for everyone. So glad this was successful and useful. And we'll be sending the recordings and decks. So look for emails in the next day or so. Maybe not the recordings. That could take a bit to produce, but it'll be coming as soon as we can. So thank you all, and we'll wrap it up there. Have a good evening, morning, wherever you are.